Yeah, there's some raving from the trolls, but you expect that because they don't like anything different. And change takes a long time. Change is long, and if you've never seen a person of color in the Tolkien universe and you are a completist, of course they're going to say something. It's really funny that you believe a dragon, but you won't believe a black guy with
Mm.
pointy ears. So I kind of feel like they just need to get used to it. It might take them years and years and years, but eventually, 21st century 21st century storytelling will out.
Why do
Change
you
is coming. It's happening. Get used to it.
why do you think that is? What's going on there? Why do people find it easier to believe in a dragon than to believe in a black hobbit? Is it just racism? Is it traditionalism? Is it a sort of, I mean, because you'd think people who are engaging with fantasy in the first place would be ready for their mind to be expanded even in ways that they might find unexpected beforehand, yet
You
only in
think?
certain directions, right?
Is that what you think? I think some of the great science fiction writers like Stephen King and Rod Serling and people like that said that fantasy and science fiction is a place where you can set it in the future or the past, but you can be talking about today. And perhaps the showrunners, Patrick and JD, particularly, and in some ways Neil Gaiman in Sandman and the guys in The Witcher, are just thinking we need to whatever those guys think. This kind of storytelling needs to change. We need a black captain in Star Trek. We need more superheroes of color. We need more black and brown fairies. We need a black Little Mermaid. It's about time. Let's just change it so that it exists in the world. And you put it out there in the universe, and some people are going to go, "Ugh," but in the end, it's going to change.
Let's dive right in. Tell me about the Book of Legends.
The Book of Legends is a quest book. I've always loved quest books, from the Famous Five to, I don't know, Billy Bunter to the Narnia kids to the Hobbits and Gandalf. Those books have always sparked something in me. The kind of lust for adventure and meeting magical creatures and being in fantasy lands. I've always loved these kind of books ever since I was a kid and joined Dudley Library, where I still have some books here from Dudley Library from when I was 8 and never took back. And I always thought, wouldn't it be great to have a book like this where somebody that looked like me or my daughter was in it? And I guess that's the big why of it all, was that none of these books ever had people that look like me. I always thought there should be somebody, there should have a black friend or somebody or a brown hobbit or, somebody that was not Peter or Daisy or Susan or Billy or whatever. There should be a Rakim in there someplace.
Is that an absence you were conscious of as a child, or is it something that just sort of dawned on you as you grew older and you're like, hang on, looking back?
Well, no, I think it didn't really occur to me when I was a kid because I loved reading and I loved those writers so much. Don't get me wrong, this isn't about race or anything. It's just about inclusion. I'm there reading Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and things and Richmond Crompton and Enid Blyton and loving those stories because they took me to another place. And then later, when my daughter arrived in the 90s, I was reading these stories and realizing very quickly that there were just no black or brown kids in these stories ever. And maybe that was something that could change. And usually when you say, somebody should do something about that, you're usually talking about yourself. So when the opportunity came to write books and stuff, I jumped in and said, okay, let's do this.
And look, I mean, this particular book, this is pitched at it's called middle grade fiction. It's pitched for sort of 8 to 12-year-olds. Is that an easy place for you to aim your writing, your humor at? Do you have to adjust to get there, or does it feel very natural?
I didn't find out about that until the book was finished. I kind of wrote it for me to read and enjoy the reading of. The jokes are for me to enjoy. And then I just said, well, I hope young people like it too. And I think that's, I think 8 to 12, 14 is a good place to be. Wherever J.K. Rowling aimed her books, that's where I'm aiming these.
No,
They're meant to be fun. And they have magic in them. If you think about it, Lord of the Rings is supposed to be a book for kids, and it's really complex and deep. So I kind of feel like, I'm not writing Lord of the Rings. I'm writing something that's a bit simpler, but, I want there to be jokes in there, and I want there to be moments where you go, oh! And I think it does that because kids have told me so.
When you were a reader of of that age, what kind of reader were you? Were you the sort of like a constantly sort of nose in a book, completely engrossed in another planet? Were you an occasional reader? How did it work for you?
I think I had this thing in my head was that I was a constant reader, but I know when I was at Jessens Junior School in Dudley, I absolutely believed that I read a lot of Dickens books. And I reread Dombey and Son recently and realised I must have skimmed because I just didn't remember half the things that were in the book. But do you find that with when you reread books anyway, that it's nothing like what you thought it was the first time you read it? What did I just read again? I read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman again the other day for the fourth time. And I absolutely picked up on things that I possibly hadn't seen the first time of reading. And I think that's what's brilliant about a book, you know. You can read them, like I've read that Stephen King's The Stand 6 times, and every time you kind of go, oh, you know, because the writing's so complete and wonderful and twisty and turny. And that's the kind of book I want to write.
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly with books you read when you were young, you can have missed a sort of a huge amount that slightly takes you aback when you sort of hit it again in later life. Look, I mean, we covered this already, but let's get back to it. The main characters then in the Book of Legends, Bran and Fran, are kids of colour.
Yeah, they're kids of colour. They're twins. Fran is kind of shy, but she interprets everything and signs on Bran's behalf when he's too cross to do it. And Bran is very brave, but he's deaf. And he signs all the time, and it's tedious to him. He goes to a school where BSL, British Sign Language, is taught as one of the languages, but he gets into lots of fights because kids take the mick out of him. And so he basically has to learn to curb his temper, and Fran has to learn to be a bit braver. But between them, they're a pretty good whole, and they've always got each other's backs. And when their mum disappears, they, after a while, are being looked after by their auntie Madge, who's not really an auntie, but she just owns the mum's shop where she works. They realise that they've got to find their mum, and they find the means to do so via a book that their mum has written. Turns out she's a master storyteller and works in a bookshop called Once Upon a Wow as the resident storyteller. And she's written this book, and it has lots of stories and tales and poems that may or may not have clues for how to go to a magic kingdom and indeed find her. And they embark on an adventure that is extraordinary.
Look, I mean, a writer has to sort of fall in love with their characters in a way and be captivated by their characters and fascinated by their characters. As part of your reason for setting out on this project was, as you say, representation. How do you balance that with sort of like, making sure the characters were doing what you wanted them to do on a conceptual level, while also just sort of following the magic of them?
But if you start off with a theme, you're never going to finish your book, right? It's like doing your PhD. You could have never, with your PhD, you start off over here thinking you're going to be writing about this, and then 7.5 years later, you're way over here, right about something completely different. So with a book, I just tend to think, I cannot start with, this is going to be a book about diversity and inclusion, because that way lies madness. So what I try and do is think about what would be fun. If I was a kid, what would I like to do? And I always want to go somewhere else. I always want to be a superhero or go to a magic kingdom.
There's still time.
Magic.
There's still time, sir.
I always want to go to a magical kingdom and do stuff like that. So for me, 2 kids going on an adventure to find their mom and perhaps their dad, this to me was a no-brainer. Let's do that. And I just had to think about, where are they from? They're from Ruthvale, which is an imaginary place near the Midlands. And they go on this adventure, and they go to a place where there's a thing called a zebracorn, which is not a zebra or a unicorn, it's a zebracorn. And they meet handsome Prince Roger, and they meet murder fairies, and there's a Rastafarian wizard and his wife, who turns out to be a better wizard than he is. And they get their team together, and they go on this amazing adventure. And I thought, yeah, that sounds good. And I wanted there to be people of colour in it, because you just never see it. So I thought, I wonder if we could write a book where you hardly mention it, but it turns out that there are just people of colour everywhere, apart from Madge. And it worked. And the kids that read it don't mention the fact that all the kids are black. They just talk about how much they enjoyed the story and how they want to meet a dragon, and wouldn't it be great if they lived near a wizard, and all that kind of stuff. So it worked. So you can do inclusive stories and not bang on about people being in wheelchairs or being black or brown or whatever. You can just write a great story and perhaps occasionally drop in when you meet their parents, or when you see them walking down the street and they're looking at each other, that there is a difference. But I think stories should be inclusive, and you shouldn't really have to keep banging on about it.
Do you think so? Do you think do you think publishers are generally more aware of that than they used to be, or do you think it was easier for you as a high profile writer to force them to be aware of it?
No, I think it was on the verge of changing anyway. I mean, I started writing these when I wrote my first book, which was about my daughter, kind of. They were called Charlie books. And then I wrote a book called The Quest for the Big Wolf back in the 90s. And I think I was Lenny Henry celebrity writing books then, and there weren't very many black authors around. And then slowly, with the onset of Mallory Blackman and Nadia Shoween and Nathan Byron, we've had a change. So you walk past a bookshop window now, and more often than not, you'll see black authors there too. And I think that's been a change in the last 10 years, really. Good.
Yeah, sure. Yesterday, you did an event in Newnham, which is sort of virtually reaching, I believe, 9,400 kids in 59 schools. Apart from being a fantastic promotion for a book, how important are those kind of events for you? And speaking to children, speaking to the readers.
They're really, really good. I think speaking to kids, speaking to children and their parents, it's the best thing. Because they ask great questions. They want to know what pajamas you were wearing when you were writing the book. They want to tell you jokes. Why was 6 scared of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. They want to know if the book's going to be a movie yet. They ask you great questions. And to do this thing yesterday in Newham, where there were 9,000 other kids watching from other schools on satellite, was a real privilege. I feel like I reached a lot of children, and they sent in questions by text. And they laughed a lot, and they asked questions, and we showed them videos of Keenan Farrell, and it was really good for them to see pictures of Keenan, who does the illustrations for the Book of Legends and for The Boy with Wings, because he's a black guy with dreadlocks, and he's an animator in Brooklyn, New York. And they saw him drawing Tundi and drawing the zebracorn. And, when you can see yourself doing things, you can go, actually, that guy looks like me, and I guess I could do that too. If you can't see it, you can't be it. So that's the reason to be doing these things, is so that kids can go, hey, that guy came to my school talking about fantasy universes. I want to do that.
Look, I've got to ask you.
He's an idiot.
I've got to ask you this now. What pajamas were you wearing when you wrote them?
I have a variety of pajamas. I've got one with lots of robots on them. So usually it's those. Sometimes it's football shorts and a kind of a T-shirt from Brooklyn with lots of wrappers on it. But I love to sit in the kitchen, drink tea, eat hobnobs, and write. I don't know what it is, but I've got an office and everything. But somehow the kitchen is the place to be.
Well, look, seeing as we're on fantasy, I've got to ask you about Lord of the Rings, the new Amazon series, The Rings of Power. You play a Harfoot, who are a sort of proto-Hobbit, can we call them? Pre-Hobbits?
Yeah, they're Hobbit.
Hobbit is very good.
1,000 years before canon.
Yeah.
So 1,000 years before Bilbo Baggins and Frodo went on their adventures, the Harfoots were there in this kind of earliest incarnation of Middle-earth. They were a nomadic tribe moving from place to place with the weather and the seasons to go where the crops were growing. And they had carts that they pulled behind them, and they wore raggedy clothes. They weren't the kind of waistcoat wearing, fob watch wearing hobbits that we're used to. They were very much a nomadic tribal group of people that were hard-footed, hairy-footed, and dark-skinned because they were always in the sun. So that was the pitch. And so when I got the script, I went, I'm doing this. And I sort of didn't care that it was a small part. I just thought, I'm going to do this because people need to see this, People need to see a black hobbit. It's about time. Let's rock.
Well, how's the response there been? I mean, I know that the response seems to have been largely great with a bit of sort of expected sort of raving in the background, right? Yeah,
there's some raving from the trolls, but you expect that because they don't like anything different. And change takes a long time. Change is long, and if you've never seen a person of color in the Tolkien universe and you are a completist, of course they're going to say something. It's really funny that you believe a dragon, but you won't believe a black guy with pointy ears. So I kind of feel like they just need to get used to it. It might take them years and years and years, but eventually, 21st century storytelling will out. Change is coming. It's happening. Get used to it.
Why do you think that is? What's going on there? Why do people find it easier to believe in a dragon than to believe in a black hobbit. Is it just racism? Is it traditionalism? Is it a sort of, I mean, because you'd think people who are engaging with fantasy in the first place would be ready for their mind to be expanded, even in ways that they might find unexpected beforehand, yet
You
only in
think?
certain directions, right?
Is that what you think? I think some of the great science fiction writers like Stephen King and Rod Serling and people like that said that fantasy and science fiction is a place where you can set it in the future or the past, but you can be talking about today. And perhaps the showrunners, Patrick and JD particularly, and in some ways Neil Gaiman in Sandman and the guys in The Witcher, are just thinking, we need to, whatever those guys think, this kind of storytelling needs to change. We need a black captain in Star Trek. We need more superheroes of color. We need more black and brown fairies. We need a black Little Mermaid. It's about time. Let's just change it so that it exists in the world. And you put it out there in the universe, and some people are going to go, "Argh," but in the end, it's going to change. It has to.
You wrote last year with Marcus Ryder the Diversity Manifesto for TV and beyond.
Right.
18 months on. I mean, do you feel, are things moving in the right direction there? I know it's early days, but early days from when you wrote it, not early days generally.
I think that what's great is apparently when people join a diversity and inclusion department, they are given Access All Areas as a must-read artifact. So we must have done something right. And we've got this podcast now called Black British Lives Matter, where we discuss a lot of the issues that we're all going through in terms of the workplace, in terms of workplace bullying, racism, having a safe place to speak to your bosses, your employers, bullying, sexism. Black British Lives Matters talks to various people in terms of fashion, in terms of education, politics, being a dad, being a mum. All of these things are things we should all be talking about all the time. And the podcast is somewhere we can do that. And I think that the book of that really expanded the conversation about what we should be talking about, what we should be thinking about in this day and age. Because we're all trying to get on, right? We all want to get on with each other. And there are those out there that think this is the worst thing possible. I don't know why. But there are those people out there who think that all of us getting on is the worst idea possible. And we have to fight with all our might to change their minds. By hook or by crook.
You're speaking about the Book of Legends at the Cheltenham Literature Festival on Sunday. This show actually is there on Saturday. I think you are. What sorry? Yeah. Sorry. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you didn't say no, I'm not. Otherwise I'd have to scrap this bit. But no, who are you on stage? On stage when you're talking about this book, are you the same sort of Lenny Henry who's a comedian on stage, who's a performer and an actor on stage, or do you find yourself being a slightly different person?
It's all the same, Lenny. If you split yourself up like that, you go mad. I try and be the same. Try and be authentic. Try and be real. Try and have fun. Try and answer questions honestly, but try and get to a joke at the end. You know, I just try and do what I've always done, but I'm age appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
okay.
when I'm talking to kids, like when we're doing Tiswas, you're not allowed to be rude or swear or anything. So because I learned that at a very early age, I just switched that part of me off. And then when I'm talking about my memoir, Rising to the Top, I'm more authentic, and I'm able to be realer and ruder, because the book is about me being an adult, not about being a kid. But I love all manner of things now, and I'm getting used to talking to kids again. It used to, at first, I quite slightly, because I thought when I was doing Tiswas, I did this all the time. But I've had quite a long time of not being on children's telly. So having a thing where you're talking to kids about creativity and writing and jokes and stuff, it's a different demand on your intellect. Got to think it through about what you're trying to say. And in Book of Legends, there's quite a lot of morality tales throughout, because it's stories within stories. And you might learn something if you read these stories. And I guess the point of it is that the kids, Fran and Bran, get a clue and a hint as to how to behave at each section of the story because of these stories their mom wrote. And if I can put that across to the young people listening to me, then that's good. I've done a good job.
Sure.
And the jokes are a bonus, so that's good.
The last volume of your memoirs, Rising to the Surface, and your memoirs generally, you've talked about how the process of writing them. I mean, has the process of writing them helped you sort of understand yourself better, your experiences better? Do you think about yourself differently to how you did before you started writing the memoirs? Did they
I think
change you?
I think any kind of writing, fact or fiction, opens you up to a thought process. Why am I thinking this? Why am I writing like this? Why did I choose this subject matter? And I think when you're writing a memoir, which is your life, it's really interesting to revisit those times. You know, they say no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. Same with laughter. You find yourself laughing at things you did when you were 12 or 14 or 40. And you also find yourself genuinely moved by stuff that happened to you that might only have occurred to you as you're writing it, just how sad something was. So I think that it's a catharsis when you're writing, and if it's not, something's wrong.
But you seemed, I mean, as a writer, particularly with your memoirs and in a documentary I saw you in earlier this year, you seem to be you're in a sort of a process of constant self-discovery that a lot of people, when they reach let's say our stage in life, perhaps sometimes no longer are.
Yeah, but it's kind of telly's one thing, but when you're writing about yourself and you're thinking about yourself, you're reflecting, and when you reflect, you have an opportunity to not just remember it and write it down. You're reflecting and you're thinking, how do I shape this for this narrative? How do I describe this moment? And also report back on what you felt about that moment at the time. So that means you're re-experiencing it. You're not just thinking about it and writing it down. You're re-experiencing it. And I think, because I did a lot of grief therapy after my mum died. And I'm an admirer of the talking therapy anyway. This sense of re-examination does you good, you know. It's good to think about those things.
Yeah. Okay. You talk also in the memoir about the extent to which you threw yourself into work, and how you sometimes regretted throwing yourself so hard into work. Yet here you are now. You've got a memoir just published, children's book out. You're acting in The Rings of Power. You're a showrunner on a big new ITV drama. You're throwing yourself into work quite a lot now, right?
But I like the work, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think work where you're just working to work is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's tricky, and sometimes you have to learn that. You know, I used to get called. You know, I remember Adrian Edmondson asking me why I was going on tour again, and I couldn't answer him. It was just what I was doing, and I think I was a worketeer, not a workaholic. I liked work, but after a while, you start to think about choosing your work carefully, because you're going to burn out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think after my mum died, and when I was doing my BA, I just kept thinking, perhaps this idea of working and studying and having time with your family is a better model than what I was doing. And now I tend to lead with the writing and the creativity, and then whatever happens after that, I do that too. So the show running came because I wrote something. Mm-hmm. So it's all connected up. It's not me going, I'm going to write something, now I'm going to show run, now I'm going to write something else. They're all connected. So, and I enjoy it. And I can't imagine, you know, I was working in a factory when I was 16, and I just can't imagine doing a job where I wasn't enjoying it. You know, I'm doing this because I love doing it, not because I have to do it. And I think that's the main factor in this. The dominating factor is that I love my work, and it's not really like work to me. It's hard to explain that to civilians.
What can you tell us about the ITV drama then? It's about the Windrush generation, right?
No, it's about the post-Windrush generation,
right?
And it starts with it's inspired by my mom and my aunties and my sister's stories about coming to Britain in 1957, 10 years after the Windrush. Just as Macmillan starts and says, "You've never had it so good," is when my mom arrived. So the stories begin with 3 women arriving in Britain at Tilbury Docks, and they go to London, and they go to a party, and one of them starts her job as a maid of all work in Boreham Wood, and the other three go to the Midlands to start working in the factory in the next couple of days. And it's about their experiences of encountering patriarchal Britain, post Windrush, post Empire, if you like, pre Jamaica becoming independent, and just the attitude of they come over here, they take our jobs, they steal our women, but in a covert fashion, not in a kind of unconscious bias way, but in a kind of very much in your face, written on walls kind of way. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. And how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis? How do you deal with people clutching their handbags when they see you walking down the street or crossing the street or simply slamming the door in your face or refusing to serve you in a pub? So it's about that. But it's got joy and it's got tragedy and it's got romance in it and love and heartache. It's got all those things in it. And there's 6 episodes this season. And if they like it, they'll do another season. And I'm really pleased. I'm so far, touch wood, I'm really happy with what I'm seeing when they send the dailies to you, thinking you're going to watch 4 hours of rushes every day. But they're shooting it now. I should be there now. So that's what I've learned. Russell T Davies said, go to the set sometimes, but don't think you've got to be there all the time, and don't get bogged down in the rushes. Watch what you have to watch. So I'm learning how to work. The thing is, work better.
Yeah.
Don't just work hard, work better. So that's what I'm trying to do in my 60s.
Well, look, I'll look forward to seeing that. We're very nearly out of time, but before I go, look, you're a beloved comedian. You've been an actor and a personality to many generations of British people. When do you follow in John Cleese's footsteps and start your new show on GB News?
I don't know what that is. I know it's caused a stir. But Cleese, I retweeted. I saw that, and I retweeted that brilliant sketch about what has the BBC ever done for us, which is beautifully performed, and I think there's one person of colour in it, but it's still incredibly well performed. I'm a massive Python fan, and I guess people change and have their opinions, but I've been on Radio 1, I always wanted to be a DJ and I got to be on Radio 1. So I kind of fulfilled that ambition when I was in my 20s. So it's hard work doing the radio, as you're finding. I think it's very difficult. You've got to know what you want to say, and you've got to get it together, and you've got to do it. If you're on every day, you've got to do it every day. I went on Chris Evans' show, and I was really struck by how well organised and like a well-oiled machine it was. And it's not about the records. I always thought DJing was about the records, but it's not. It's about what you're thinking that day. It's about what you're choosing to share with the audience and how you're going to do that. It's about what's on your mind and how articulate you are in putting that across, and then doing the weather and the traffic. It's hard. Doing a radio show is very difficult. And so when you listen to Wogan or Zoe Ball or Sarah Cox or Chris Evans or any of those people, Trevor Nelson, and it sounds so easy. That's hard work.
Oh, well, I'm not sure I ever make it sound easy, but you certainly do. Look, what a pleasure. So Lenny Henry, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And I should say, of course, the Book of Legends is out now. Right, Rachel, are you there still? She should come back. Yep. Hello. All good from your end? So what happens now? You need to press something, then it uploads, right? Sorry, say that again. So are we free to leave or not? Or